The signs you keep seeing are not a coincidence. Carl Jung observed that the psyche has a way of speaking to us from outside as well as from inside, and that the boundary between the two is not as solid as we assume. As Jung wrote in Ion, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate, and he meant this almost literally, not as poetry but as clinical observation. The thing you refuse to look at within yourself has a way of arranging itself in the world in front of you, the number that keeps appearing, the stranger's sentence that answers the question you never asked aloud, the bird at the window on the day you needed one. None of this proves the universe is arranging your life for you, and Jung himself was far more careful than that, but it does suggest something quieter and in some ways more remarkable, that the inner world and the outer world are not always as separate as the modern mind likes to believe, and that certain moments seem to fold the two together. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, consider staying close by subscribing, so that tomorrow's teaching finds you as easily as these signs seem to find you. The first key is, most of what you are calling a sign is simply chance wearing a coat that fits you well, and Jung would have insisted on this before anything else. He did not go looking for mystery in every red car or every repeated hour on the clock. He was a scientist by training and a physician by trade, and he knew that the mind is a pattern-hunting instrument, built by evolution to find faces in clouds and meaning in noise. Because a false alarm cost our ancestors nothing, but a false sense of safety cost them their lives. So before you decide that the world is speaking to you, Jung would ask you to rule out the ordinary explanation first. Are you noticing this number because you have been thinking about it all week? Are you seeing this stranger's face because your own mind has been rehearsing it? Imagine you buy a certain make of car, a plain grey sedan, nothing special, and within days, the road seems flooded with that same grey sedan, at every light, in every lane, and for a moment, it feels as though the world has aligned itself around your choice. But nothing in the world has changed at all, only your attention has changed. The cars were always there, your mind simply stopped filtering them out. This is called frequency illusion by researchers today, but Jung understood the underlying mechanism decades earlier, without needing the modern label. The psyche is not a passive mirror, it is an active editor, constantly discarding what seems irrelevant and promoting what seems to matter. And once something matters to you, whether a car, a number, or a name, the world appears to fill with it, not because it has multiplied, but because you have finally started counting. The mind is not lying to you exactly. It is simply doing what minds do, sorting for relevance. And most of what you are calling a sign will dissolve the moment you examine it honestly. Ask yourself plainly, was I already primed to notice this before it appeared? And more often than not, you will find the answer waiting for you. This is not a discouraging key. It is a clearing of the ground, because what Jung was interested in was rarer and stranger than ordinary coincidence. And you cannot see the rare thing clearly while your hands are full of the common one, so let the decree of this key be quiet and honest. I will not call every coincidence a message. I will not call every coincidence a message. The second key is, synchronicity is not any coincidence. It is a very specific kind of coincidence. An inner state and an outer event, meeting without a causal thread between them, and yet meeting in a way that feels charged with significance. Jung defined it in his essay on synchronicity as an acausal connecting principle, a meaningful coincidence between a psychic state and a physical event. And he was careful with every word in that sentence. Acausal means one did not cause the other. There is no mechanism, no hidden wire strung between them. Meaningful means the connection is felt, not measured. It cannot be put on a scale or run through an instrument. And psychic state means the event lands only because something in you was already primed to receive it. Before it arrives, you are already leaning toward it, already carrying the question it seems to answer. This is why the same event can be synchronicity for one person and mere noise for another, standing in the very same spot. Imagine two people pass the same fox crossing the same lonely path on the same evening. One of them has spent the day locked in grief over a decision they cannot make, turning it over and over with no rest, and the fox stops, looks at them directly, holds still a moment longer than any wild animal should, and something in them settles, as though the world itself confirmed a choice they had not yet dared to speak. The other person simply thinks, "A fox," and keeps walking, feeling nothing at all, because nothing in them was waiting for it. Jung wrote of just such a fox in a 1945 letter, noting the strange quality these encounters can carry when the inner and outer arrive together at the same threshold. As though two separate rivers had briefly run into the one bed, the event did not change, only the readiness of the one who met it. The fox did not perform differently for the grieving person. The fox simply was a fox, doing what foxes do, and this tells you something important. Synchronicity is not a public announcement broadcast to everyone within range, like a bell rung over a village. It is a private meeting between an inner constellation and an outer occurrence, and it will not repeat itself for you on command. Nor will it mean the same thing twice, which means the question is never simply what happened. The question is always, what was already alive in me when it happened? What had I been carrying, unspoken, in the hours before? So let the decree of this key be, I will ask what was stirring in me before I ask what the sign means. I will ask what was stirring in me before I ask what the sign means. The third key is, the clearest account Jung gave of this was medical, not mystical, and it is worth hearing in full because it shows exactly how careful his thinking was. He was treating a patient, a highly rational woman, whose excessive intellect had sealed her off from her own inner life. Every session she offered him a flawless argument for why nothing needed to change. Her feelings were filed away like paperwork. Her dreams were dismissed before they could speak. And Jung found himself, session after session, unable to reach the actual person underneath the reasoning. Then one day, she recounted a dream in which she had been given a golden scarab, a costly and rare gift, arriving from somewhere beyond her control. And as she was telling him this dream, calm and detached as always, Jung heard a tapping at the window. He opened it, and a scarabæid beetle flew directly into the room, the nearest local equivalent of a golden scarab that exists in that region. He caught it in his hand, and turning to her, he said, "Here is your scarab." In the CW8 account of this, Jung notes that this broke through her rationalism at last, and something in her finally shifted, not because a beetle appeared, insects fly into windows every day and mean nothing, but because the timing collided with the exact content of her inner life at the exact moment her defenses were thinnest. Imagine, for a moment, someone far closer to your own life. A man who has spent 20 years managing every feeling with a spreadsheet kind of logic, who has told himself 100 times that the marriage is fine, that the grief over his father is finished, that the restlessness at night means nothing. And then one ordinary week, a song his father used to hum plays unprompted in a shop. A stranger on a train mentions the exact town where his father died, and something in his chest finally cracks that no argument had touched in years. The event itself was small, a song, a sentence, but it arrived at the one moment his sealed reasoning could not defend against it. This is the pattern Jung kept finding across very different lives. Synchronicity does not usually arrive to confirm what you already comfortably believe. It tends to arrive at thresholds, at the edge of a decision, in the middle of grief, at the hinge of a transformation the conscious mind has been quietly resisting for a long time. The beetle did not cure the woman on its own, and the song did not resolve the man's grief on its own. But each one cracked open a door that pure argument had failed to open. This is worth sitting with slowly, because it means the sign is rarely random in its timing, even when it is random in its mechanism. It shows up precisely when the unconscious has something urgent to say, and the ordinary channels of thought have been sealed shut against it. So the real question is never only what appeared in front of you. The real question is what in you had been locked, and for how long. So let the decree of this key be, I will notice when the sign comes, not only what it is. I will notice when the sign comes, not only what it is. The fourth key is, Jung connected all of this to what physics itself was discovering in his own lifetime. And this is not a decoration on his theory, it was central to it. He corresponded for years with the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, and in his essay on synchronicity, he pointed to the discontinuities of physics, the places where the old causal picture of the universe simply stopped explaining what was observed. He was not claiming that quantum mechanics proves the mystical. He was far too careful a thinker for that kind of leap. What he was saying is more modest and more interesting. That causality itself, the assumption that everything must be explained by something pushing on something else, might not be the only principle operating in nature. There might be another kind of ordering, one that connects events by meaning rather than by force. And this mattered to Jung not as an abstract theory, but as a way of taking seriously what his patients kept bringing him. Imagine a man who has spent 30 years as an engineer, trained to trust only what can be measured, wired, and repeated in a laboratory. And one week his mother, long estranged, appears vividly in a dream, speaking a single sentence he has not heard since childhood. And 3 days later, sorting through mail he has ignored for a month, he finds a letter announcing her death. The timestamp on the letter falls almost exactly on the night of the dream. Now this man does not become a mystic overnight, and Jung would not have wanted him to. But something in his causal picture of the world has been quietly punctured, not proven wrong, only shown to be incomplete. This is the modest claim Jung was actually making, not that the universe bends itself around our wishes, but that the wall between inner life and outer event may be thinner and more porous at certain rare thresholds than the tidy 19th century picture of cause and effect ever allowed for. Here is where you have to be honest with yourself, because this is exactly the kind of idea that gets hijacked. In the century since Jung wrote this, a great deal of language has grown up around numbers on clocks, repeating sequences, angel numbers, none of which came from Jung, none of which he ever wrote about, and none of which fits the caution he built into every page of his actual essay. Jung's synchronicity is rare, unwillable, and resistant to being summoned on command. It is not a vending machine that dispenses confirmation whenever you feel anxious and check the time. It did not visit the engineer every week of his life. It visited him once, at the hinge of a loss he had not yet let himself feel. If you find yourself hunting for the sign, engineering your day around noticing it, refreshing the clock, needing it to arrive before you can rest, you have already left the territory Jung was mapping and wandered into something closer to superstition, wearing his name as a coat. The real thing is quieter than that, and stranger, and it does not care whether you were looking for it. It arrives, when it arrives at all, on its own schedule, and not on yours. So let the decree of this key be: I will not summon the sign. I will only recognize it if it comes. I will not summon the sign. I will only recognize it if it comes. The fifth key is the turn, and it asks something harder of you than simply cataloging strange events in your life. It asks you to notice what you are actually doing when you reach for a sign. Because there is an honest use of this idea, and there is a use that quietly betrays it. Imagine you are facing a decision you do not want to make, whether to leave a job, whether to end something, whether to finally say the thing you have swallowed for years, and you find yourself waiting, watching for a feather, a repeated number, a stranger's remark, something to arrive from outside and decide it for you. This is not what Jung meant by meeting you at a threshold. This is the ego outsourcing its own responsibility to the universe, hoping to be excused from the discomfort of choosing. Jung was direct about this kind of evasion in other contexts. He wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own souls, and waiting endlessly for a sign to arrive before you will act can become exactly this kind of absurd avoidance, dressed up as spiritual patience. Imagine someone who has known for 2 years that a friendship has quietly become a drain. Every conversation leaves them smaller. Every meeting is followed by a headache they cannot explain. And rather than sit with that knowledge, they start watching for confirmation. They notice the same 3 digits on a receipt, on a clock, on a license plate, and they tell themselves, when I see it a 4th time, that will be my answer. This is not attention to the unconscious. This is bargaining with it. The mind already knows what it wants to do. It simply does not want to be the one who did it. So it hands the verdict to a passing car. Notice how this differs from the scarab. The patient in that room was not stalling. She was in the room, doing the work, telling the dream honestly, and the beetle arrived into an already open process. It did not begin the process for her. The difference between these two people is not the coincidence itself. The coincidence might look identical from the outside. The difference is what each of them was doing in the hours and weeks before it arrived. One was working and got confirmed. The other was avoiding and got an excuse. Jung trusted the deeper self to move slowly and honestly toward its own conclusions, and he distrusted anything that let the conscious mind skip the labor of arriving there itself. This is why he never treated a sign as an instruction, only as a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence you were already writing. So ask yourself honestly this week, when you notice a repeated number or an odd coincidence, are you using it to avoid the harder work of looking inward, or are you letting it point you back towards something you already sense but have not yet said aloud? One is a form of hiding, the other is a form of listening, and only you know, in your own quiet moments, which one you are actually doing. The test is simple, though not always comfortable. Ask whether you would still make the same choice if the sign never came at all. If the answer is yes, the sign was confirmation. If the answer is no, the sign was an excuse, wearing the costume of fate. So let the decree of this key be, I will not wait for a sign to do the deciding that is mine to do. I will not wait for a sign to do the deciding that is mine to do. The sixth key is a practice, and it is deliberately unglamorous, because Jung's own approach to this material was never about chasing the miraculous. It was about paying honest attention over time. Take a page, divide it into 2 columns. On the left column, write down your inner state, plainly and without embellishment. What were you afraid of? What question were you actually carrying? What had you been unable to say to yourself? On the right column, write the outer event, the coincidence, the sign, the strange timing. And here is the part most people skip. Write the left column first, before you know what the right column will hold, because the mind is a gifted editor, and if you write the event first, you will unconsciously reshape your account of the inner state to fit it. This is the same discipline Jung applied to his dream journals. Recording the material before interpretation could quietly rewrite the evidence. First, Chun-san, quietly exhausted by a long friendship that had become one-sided. She cannot decide whether to say something or simply let the friendship fade on its own. She begins the ledger, not expecting anything mystical, only because she is tired of turning every small event of her day into a verdict. On the left, she writes, plainly, I feel unseen after our calls. I keep making excuses for her silence. On the right, she writes, whatever actually happened. A song on the radio, a stranger who resembled her friend. Most nights, the right column holds nothing worth noting at all. The radio played a song, the stranger walked past, and that was the whole of it. She closes the notebook, and nothing in her stirs. This monotony is not the exercise failing, it is the exercise doing exactly what it should, training her eye to tell the difference between an ordinary Tuesday and something that actually presses on her from outside. Then one evening, she writes on the left, I am afraid that ending this friendship means admitting I was wrong about her all along. And that same night, an old letter from this very friend falls out of a book she has not opened in years, landing face up at her feet. She did not go looking for it, she was not thinking about it when it fell, and something in her chest recognizes the moment before her mind has finished analyzing it. Jung would not tell her the letter decided anything. He would tell her to notice what door in her had opened, to sit with the recognition rather than build a doctrine on it, and then to return to the actual decision still waiting in front of her. The ledger does not remove that decision. It only tells her, with some honesty, that her inner life and her outer life have briefly touched at a real seam rather than an imagined one. This is the whole discipline in miniature. Patience across many ordinary nights, so that the rare night can be trusted when it finally comes. So let the decree of this key be, I will keep the ledger honestly, and let the rare moment speak for itself. I will keep the ledger honestly, and let the rare moment speak for itself. Here is the whole picture. Most coincidences are simply the mind finding patterns it was built to find. Synchronicity proper is an acausal meeting of an inner state and an outer event. The readiness inside you decides whether an event lands as noise or as meaning. Real signs tend to arrive at thresholds, when the unconscious has something urgent and the usual doors are shut. Physics itself hinted to Jung that causality may not be the only ordering principle in nature, but this rare thing is not a vending machine and cannot be summoned by watching a clock. The sign was never given to make your decisions for you, only to confirm what the deeper self had already begun to know. And the honest practice is patient. 2 columns, kept over time, most nights saying nothing at all, until the rare night when they do. So if a number keeps finding you this week, or a stranger says the sentence you needed, do not rush to worship it, and do not rush to dismiss it either. Sit with both columns honestly, and let that be enough. Face it,